In his 1836 Nature, Emerson makes the distinction between reason with a big R and understanding with a big U. He does that most clearly in the early part of the 7th chapter of the essay, which Emerson calls Idealism. I'm going to read the passage, it's brief, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about where Emerson got the idea from, this distinction between reason and understanding. And then I further want to talk a little bit about how this distinction plays into Emerson's nature in a very important way. So, Emerson says this: to the senses and the unrenewed understanding belongs a sort of instinctive belief in the absolute existence of nature. In their view, man and nature are indissolubly joined. Things are ultimates, and they never look beyond their sphere. The presence of reason mars this faith. The first effort of thought tends to relax this despotism of the senses, which binds us to nature as if we were a part of it, and shows us nature aloof and, as it were, afloat. Until this higher agency intervened, the animal eye sees with wonderful accuracy sharp outlines and colored surfaces. When the eye of reason opens, to outline and surface are at once added grace and expression. These proceed from imagination and affection and abate somewhat the angular distinctness of objects. If the reason be stimulated to more earnest vision, outlines and surfaces become transparent and are no longer seen. Causes and spirits are seen through them. The best moments of life are these delicious awakenings of the higher powers and the reverential withdrawing of nature before its God. So a minister, one James Marsh from Vermont, I believe, published an American edition of Coleridge's book from the 1820s called Aids to Reflection. And Marsh provided a detailed introduction to this edition of Coleridge's Aids to Reflection. And in this introduction, Marsh explained what Coleridge meant by the distinction between reason and understanding, a distinction that Coleridge valued very deeply. It shows up in his work many places. He borrowed the terms from Immanuel Kant, the most profound philosophical influence on Coleridge. I won't go into the Kantian metaphysics right now. That would take too much time. But suffice it to say that Emerson read Marsh's introduction, Emerson read Aids to Reflection, and he himself borrowed these terms. Now, what's the difference between reason and understanding? For Coleridge and for Emerson, the understanding is that part of the mind that is attuned to the sensual world, the part of the mind that looks at the tactile world and is attuned to variety, is attuned to relationship. That part of the mind which allows us to negotiate just getting around. There's an object. If I don't move out of the way, it might run into me. So just think of the understanding roughly as the empirical faculty. Think of the understanding roughly as Locke's idea of a mind. Locke, of course, believed that the mind was a blank slate at birth, and we gain knowledge how? Sense perceptions write themselves, as it were, on this blank slate. And over time, our mind is able basically to collate these various sensory perceptions and arrange them into logical relationships with one another. Now, Emerson doesn't believe that the mind is a tabula rasa at birth. He believes there are innate ideas. Coleridge does too. But the understanding is basically the empirical mind. It can also be referred to as the scientific mind in a way. trying to understand the physical world, trying to grasp the behavior of nature. And certainly the first 6 books, let me get my numbers right, the first 5 books, or chapters, sorry, the first 5 chapters of nature, including the introduction, are largely drawn from a grasp of the world through the understanding. You can think of it. Commodity is an early chapter. What does it mean to grasp nature as a commodity? Well, you can see nature as a sort of hump, of mass, a reservoir of raw material that we can transform into useful objects. We can turn trees into wood, and we can turn this wood into money. Everyone is able to commodify nature. It's a very basic activity, and the understanding drives this. Think of the chapter Beauty. This is a little more complicated, but Emerson in that chapter does mainly focus on sights of the natural world that are striking in their variety, are striking in their interplay between unity and diversity. There's a real emphasis on the visual in the chapter Beauty. And language, also we can think of the understanding. Language chapter basically says that the way we can understand ourselves is to look at the world outside of ourselves and use the things of the world as mirrors, as it were, to reflect back to us ourselves. So in this regard, we use nature as symbol. The objects of the natural world allow us to manifest, to express, to externalize our inward feelings. That again is largely an effort of the understanding. So let's think of a more specific example that is not from nature. Think of your relationship to the ocean. You can think of the ocean horizontally or vertically. Horizontally, you're standing in the ocean and you can see the different waves and you can see the chaos of the foam, and you can feel the current hit your shins. You can feel the sand on your feet. And you probably have a sense of power, of force, of chaos. You are in a world that is sort of overwhelming in its sensory information. You are using your understanding to engage with the ocean on that horizontal level. But what if you could elevate yourself somehow? What if you go power gliding, or you're in a helicopter or airplane, and you fly over that same shoreline, that same ocean shoreline? Well, now suddenly everything looks almost still from that distance, tranquil, harmonious. And you can be aware not so much of the parts, but you can be aware of the whole. And you start thinking about large expanses. You might start thinking about what sort of power can create such a grand, expansive body of water. Well, that's when you're starting to use your reason with a big R. That vertical sense that you're somehow above the chaotic difference, and you're able to find more stable and lasting relationships. And think of it this way: you're hiking up a mountain, and again, maybe you're straining, maybe you're breathing hard. You're looking at roots, you're looking at rocks, you're dodging trees, you're looking for water. You're using your understanding to negotiate that terrain. But then say you reach the top of the mountain and you have this grand vista and you look way out over the mountain range to the point where, again, you have a sense of stillness, harmony, tranquility. And then you start thinking about what transcends these differences, what power transcends these differences. That's when you begin to use your reason. So one more example, and this comes from Coleridge. Coleridge says, look at the door of a stagecoach, and you can see, let's imagine the stagecoach is black. It's very shiny, shiny black. And you can look at it, and you can look at the color, and you can look at touch the texture. You can take in the tactility of this stagecoach door. You can see the scratches on it. But then, if you back up a little bit, either literally or cognitively, you see that the way the light is hitting that black is almost a mirror in which you can see your reflection. And then you start thinking, oh, what is it that causes that effect? And you think, oh, it's reflection. Now, you can't see reflection as a principle, but you can understand reflection as a principle, as a law of nature that is true in all cases. That's what the reason is doing. It's using powers beyond the empirical to think about, again, more lasting and stable relationships, such as reflection, which is how light behaves when it bounces off of a surface. So this is why Emerson says that if we use our understanding, we are attuned to outline, and we're attuned to opacity, we're attuned to thickness. And that is an essential part of life. But there's more. When the eye of reason opens, we start thinking, well, what is making these outlines? What is making this opacity? Now, if you're Emerson in 1836, you might say spirit. You might say soul. You might say God. You can't see God. You can't see spirit. You can't see soul, but you can intuit it with your mind. You have a direct experience of those powers. And it's as if the opacity becomes transparent all of a sudden. And you can see the forces of being, the currents of being circulating through those opacities. The world becomes suddenly transparent. Now, Emerson was also very interested in electromagnetism at this time. He was studying the works of Faraday and Davy, both of whom suggested that there really is no such thing as matter. There are only fields of electromagnetic force in various degrees of density or rarefaction. So even if we take God and soul and spirit out of it, we can imagine that Emerson's understanding of electricity is a kind of ubiquitous force that generates the presence of everything. And I can focus on that holistic energy as opposed to the different things that are animated by this energy. And that's another example of reason. So in this regard, we can go back to Emerson's famous transparent eyeball passage and see that as a combination of reason and understanding. Emerson in that passage is crossing a bare common. He's looking at the slush in the field. A common would be a field shared by many people, not really kind of owned by the community. So he's paying attention to the slush. He's paying attention to the twilight, sky, the light. He's paying attention to the clouds. And the way he attends to these natural objects, he starts sensing something within these objects, something unifying these objects, to the point where eventually he says, I'm a transparent eyeball, meaning I'm opening my own being to these ubiquitous powers, the currents of universal being. Could be electricity, could be God. So that moment, that famous moment for Emerson, is a kind of an interplay between reason and understanding, in which the attention of the understanding is almost required for the vision of the reason. And this is what we have to ultimately get from Emerson, is that you need both. You need reason and understanding. Emerson was very interested in science at this time. He continued to be. And there's a real sense that for Emerson, to study the natural world closely with the understanding will eventually allow us to open up the things we're studying, and making, again, their opacity turn transparent and attending to the holistic forces. So this is a very important distinction for Emerson. You'll see it show up over and over again. And ultimately, it's valuable to him because it allows him to be an idealist and a naturalist at the same time. He says at one point in nature that we need a metaphysics of conchology, meaning we can study shells, but we need to do from a metaphysical angle. So you can be a naturalist, but that doesn't mean you have to give away idealism. Understanding allows you to be a naturalist. Reason allows you to be an idealist. And ultimately, you can be both at the same time. And that's the ideal for Emerson.